Tom, I should have learned how to pronounce your last name. I'm going to say Zlabinger, and you'll tell me that's the incorrect pronunciation. So it's a privilege to welcome you. Tom will be presenting on the title of The Door is Open, the story of the York College Community Jam Session from City University, New York. Tom, welcome.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here, and I want to give you and Marissa a big shout out for making this conference still happen in spite of the pandemic. And I've loved what I've heard so far, and I'm really flattered to be speaking to points across the globe. So I'll just get right into it. I'll do a couple of screen sharing things, just to give you some ideas of where I'm going today. And I want this to be more of an informal conversation, and I look forward to your questions at the end. And I'm hoping to conjure up some voices from the jam session. It's a session I've done for 3 years that came to a screeching halt in March. I started in 2017, and as a good ethnomusicologist, I've sort of collected these thoughts from 4 different students that you see in front of you. Olivia, a guitar player, says, "You can just feel the energy bouncing off the people. I love it." AJ, a guitar player, says, "It feels like it's meant to be together." Talking about. And Chanel says, "There is an order in the freeness," which I just love. And then finally, Michael, who said, "You get lifted up by falling." And this session, it's as much part of me as it's part of my students. And it's hard for me to pull apart myself from the session that is known as the York College Community Jam Session. We are one of the campuses in the City University of New York, and I've taught there for 17 years. I'm a bass player, sometimes guitar player. I come from the jazz corner of the world. I moved to New York City to be a jazz musician from the Midwest. I'm a bicultural person. I'm a US American on one side, and then an Austrian on another, and lived in Austria when I was a teenager. My father's Austrian. So I've got all these issues going back and forth about what is music, what isn't music, and these ideas earlier, June, thank you so much, about perfection versus uplift. Many of you today have given me vocabulary that will help me discover answers. And if I may be so bold to read some quotes from my students who love this session. Back to Michael, who said, "You get lifted up by falling." He says of the session is kind of like not being able to speak, and you go somewhere and someone gives you vocal cords. Someone's like, "I can cure your inability to speak." It's like being blind and someone's like, "You want to see what colors are like?" And you're a little scared. You're like, "Oh," you feel like that is such a huge thing. It's like, don't I have to deserve this? Don't I have to be something to deserve this right to do this? It's like, no, you can enjoy this. You just gotta open yourself up to it. Just like humble yourself. Colors are something everyone should be able to enjoy. You just have to let yourself enjoy it. So this enjoyment of colors, and you see these colors behind me, I thought they'd be better than my oven and microwave. And I'm interested in psychedelic music and its relationship to blues and jazz specifically. I'm working on a book called Delta Delica about the relationship between Mississippi Delta and the transatlantic discussion that between mostly England and the US around, that is psychedelia. So how do I pull all these things together? The jazz, the psychedelic, the blues. Well, as I said earlier, I came to New York to be a jazz musician because all jazz musicians come to New York and spend some time here. While I was here, I got a PhD in ethnomusicology at the CUNY Graduate Center after completing a degree in jazz performance in Queens College. And I evolved from a very traditional jazz musician who loved swing and bebop, and I still love those things, but I evolved into the world of things like Ornette Coleman and later Coltrane and Sun Ra. And I used these experiences in my teaching. I was involved with a lot of free jazz spaces, and having loved psychedelic music as a teenager and still do, I always noticed the cross or the overlap between long form jamming and long form jamming, right? Whether it's the Grateful Dead or Coltrane, there are a lot of similarities in things where these touch. And people who love this music know this, but how do we talk about it well? And I have to reference something. After I finished my PhD and deposited my dissertation called Free from Jazz, it was an exploration of jazz and improvised music in Austria, I realized that the title of my dissertation was a note to myself, in that I had to become free from this thing called jazz, which we could talk about. We already talked about canons today, and crack open some things. And I don't know if many of you have seen the movie Whiplash, which didn't depict a positive educational environment, specifically in jazz. And when it came out, discussions around what is good pedagogy and what jazz is supposed to do and not do were all over the internet and in my classroom. And it made me think about, what should music do? And originally I started a traditional jazz standards jam session on Monday nights to create some community. I've always thought community was very important around music. We've said this today several times already. And what I realized that is, there's a certain baggage that comes with, oh, you've got to play these tunes out of the real book. And I always had sort of an instinctive, this is good, but it's not for everybody. And so given my experience as a musician and a lover of psychedelic music and someone who had experience playing free music, I developed this session called the Community Jam Session. And it is simply something that happens every Tuesday, or used to have been every Tuesday before the pandemic, where students were allowed to come into a room with any instrument, any voice, any background of any kind, and just play. And it sounds to me like an obvious concept, but when I interviewed my students as to what they valued about the experience, it's worth sharing. And I'm so glad to have this opportunity to share my students' voices. Some of these things are non-obvious. We could talk about ideas of inclusion. We could talk about ideas of multiple backgrounds, not only culture, but gender, people coming together. All that was important is that we maintain a level of respect, that we maintain positivity, and that we play well. And so here are the voices that I'd like to share with you, starting with Olivia, a guitar player, who said, describing the session, so you don't have to take my word for it. I mean, I can go online and show you. This is part of my challenge talking about the session. Is you can see here that these sessions can sometimes last 50 minutes or an hour and a half. We have a room for to play during club hours, and I live stream this. You just could go to the York College Community Jam Session and see all these videos that I've just streamed of our students making music together. Just to give you an idea, I know it looks like a shameless plug because I'm in the center of it, but you see my students here playing, and I could, it's hard to squeeze in all this stuff about long form music making. Well, and it's another challenge in my writing as well. But enough about that. So let me summon my students. Olivia, guitar player, says, the session usually starts out a little bit slow, but once somebody plays something and everyone starts looking around and we're like, oh, this works, this is working. Once that starts going, everything starts to become electric, and you can feel what the next musician to you is doing, and you can start riffing with them and planning how you can change up the song, like maybe 4 to 8 bars before the change will happen. It's exciting, especially towards the end of the session. You don't want to stop because you finally reach that moment where the song is really coming together, and there is so much power in the room, and you can feel it. It's hot in there. You can just feel the energy bouncing off the people. I love it. And we play constantly. We start playing and we don't stop. The beat just keeps going. It goes from things like, you can watch the videos, hip-hoppity stuff. We've had MCs in the room, jazzy things, funky things. Yes, there are a lot of 1-chord, 2-chord vamps, but it's the coming together that it's obviously so important to people. And I asked Olivia, well, can you explain this change? And she answered, when people start to feel it more, they start to put more into playing and start sweating and it starts to get hot in there. Once it gets hot, the song is getting better. When it starts working, everyone is together making a melody that sounds cool, that sounds, what's the word? It sounds like magic, feels like magic, and everyone's working together. It feels like you're one band just making cool sounds. It's hard to describe. You have to be there to feel it, to witness it. Now, it's interesting that she talks about a band because it's different people every time. Yes, we have our usual suspects, but I just leave the doors open. That's the beginning of all of this. In the first email I sent when I did sort of envisioned this jam session, I put this little phrase, the door is open, ... at the end, saying that all forms of music making are allowed as long as we work together. And I've ended every email for the last 2.5 going on 3 years with the door is open, hence the title of this talk. Anything is possible. As long as we work together. And this has been a positive experience so many times. We've been playing for 1.5 hours, maybe almost 2 hours, and the class is supposed to start at 2 o'clock, a real class with the next professor. And I have to tell people, we gotta leave. And people are just glommed onto each other. And they get addicted to that feeling. And it's all about that feeling. I have one student, his name is AJ, who is a guitar player. He's self-taught, learned most of his stuff on YouTube, and the only time he's really played with other people is in the session or with people he met within the session. And so I was very interested because he can play very well, and his hearing has changed and his reactions have changed over the 2 years that he's been coming. And he said, I could play alone at home and I'm feeling happy, but the happiness is better when it's shared. The music sounds full when we are together. I can hear the low end and the rhythm and the harmonies and stuff, but I could never do that alone. In addition to many sounds, we have ideas too. So I'm like, what? What is this? That sounds really good. And then we would follow the idea together. As the jam session progresses, we have different ideas that go around. I guess we don't think about it that way. We just follow it together. And it's always different. If I were to play by myself, I would play the same thing over and over again. But if I play with different people, different ideas come, and we follow these ideas and just see where it takes us. It feels like it's meant to be together. So I love this idea of the music being together, and it's supposed to be together. Even though it's completely improvised, I ask students not to play a tune. I ask students to refrain from playing things we know, but sometimes it falls into a obvious lick that we then explore, but it's mostly stuff that's made up on the spot. So let me go to Chanel, the drummer who I said shared the idea that there is order in the freeness. And she is Jamaican, and I'm not going to do a Jamaican accent. I sometimes think I should just play these recordings, but then I don't know. That's a different sort of thing. Here's what she says. The best thing about the session is that the only thing structured is the time frame. That's the best thing. That's the best thing. 12 to 2. Everything else is spontaneous. That's the best thing, because at the end of the day, you don't know who's coming. You don't know what music is going to be played. You just go there anticipating whatever happens. You don't even know what's going to happen. You're just there. It's like you're going home and you're not sure what's been cooked. But when you go home, you smell your favorite thing and you're happy. It's that feeling. You don't know what to expect, but you know you're going to get something good. The anticipation is always there, and that's what I like. I like the level of freeness that the session has had. At the end of the day, in the invitation, it says all instruments are welcome, all styles are welcome. When you go there, that's exactly what you get. So you're not given false news or false invitation to come and experience openness, but when you go there, it's something that's structured. It's really open. So at the end of the day, what is being advertised in terms of the invitation, that is really what is there. And I think when people come there, the level of openness, they're usually astonished. We talk about freedom, we talk about openness, and it's never delivered. These people who come to the session, and these are all undergrads, maybe some people from the faculty who would like to share their music making, but it's mostly 18 to 22-year-olds. And because of the pandemic, I'd like to share some words that Chanel said, and these interviews were from a year ago. I had hoped to have fresh interviews for you because it's the freshness around the session is a big part of the session, but the interviews are going to be conducted in April, and there was no April, and I wanted to do it right after the music making. So this is unfortunately a little old, a year old, but it's a little fortuitous. She says, the outside world is the chaos. The outside world seems to be structured, but at the end of the day, because it is structured, it's not a place for everybody because of the specific structure that is there. It's really paradoxical because you'd expect something that is structured to fit everybody, but at the same time, that's quite the opposite. I'm not saying that things should be open and rules don't have or play an important part, but at the same time, there is a time and a place for everything. And I feel that the jam session, because of the structure, because everybody is welcome, everybody has a turn. If you have 10 drummers, each drummer gets a time to go and play, understand? And you go and express yourself. So maybe more advanced, some may be more advanced than some, it doesn't matter. Everybody has their set time. So even there is a level of openness, everybody can express themselves. So within the openness, there is still order, but it is not order in terms of who goes first. Whoever goes first, I'm there and say, I feel like to play, sure, and everybody shares, and we just get along. I think the fact that you're able to do that, people are able to get along, and whether you realize it or not, there's actually order in it. There is order in the freeness because everybody knows, hey, I'm gonna listen to you. I'll get my chance. I have some really profound things about some students sharing their idea of Zen, and this really leapt off the page that I will share with you a couple more quotes before I run out of time. AJ, the guitar player, you see these students speaking beyond their age because of the sense of trust and the sense of community and the sense of freedom. The structure is the 2 hours, the room, the instruments, everything is welcome. And given our very diverse population at York College and that we are a public institution, and I know some of you know this, Queens, New York was hit very hard by the pandemic, and I wish they had this opportunity to let go and express themselves, and I can only imagine what it'll be like when we get back to campus. But here's something AJ shared. He said, you have a different energy when you play with other people. You definitely have a different energy. When you play music, you can play it just standing still and stuff, but when you move, it makes you feel the music more. And it also makes you feel happy too. Like, wow, I really love this music because it is making me move and it's making me feel happy. And then you forget about the 2 hours. And a lot of my students talk about temporal distortion. It makes you move. It makes you make faces too. There are things you don't expect to happen that happen. And you're like, wow, you're in awe. The surprises come because it works. It's weird to think about because I don't think when I'm playing. But when you think about it, it's illogical. It's just like, wow, this is crazy. I don't know what's going on, but I like it. It's hard to describe because you need it to happen. It's like Taoist stuff. The Tao is basically just what happens. If you try to describe it, it is contradictory to the Tao. You just have to let it happen for the Tao to be Tao. This is, again, the student who had only played with musicians or didn't play with musicians because he learned all his stuff on YouTube. And I get a little emotional when I talk about the power of this session. And I'm really glad to share this with such a great community of scholars. And I know you value this because I feel a lot of this goes against our training. And it's, again, just a wonderful opportunity to share these ideas and share them with you and hear your ideas about perfection and uplift. I'm going to take that. That's my first takeaway from this. So in closing, I will get back to the drummer who said, you get lifted up by falling. He says the importance of vulnerability. All the fear and anxiety that people have that's keeping them from being vulnerable, a big part of music, really enjoying it, is loving it, is the passion. You have to love it. Anything involving love needs vulnerability. Live is kind of like gravity in a way. You let yourself fall so you can be lifted up. That's weird. You get lifted up by falling. It's like when it's two people and the other person falls, somehow you both get lifted up. The same thing goes for music. You both have to fall. It's like hitting the one, beat one, the downbeat. Everyone has to fall on it. It's like a trampoline. When you all hit it at the same time, it's like a trampoline. If all the weight comes down at once, we shoot up. Think about how high we shoot up if we did it together. If one person is like, if the weight is not hitting, it's shaky, it's rocky, it's unstable. But if we all jump on the trampoline at once, we go way higher. And that's when you start giggling. It's like, it's fun. That's, yeah, for me, the last comment is just vulnerability. Jam sessions remind me of that. Be a little vulnerable sometimes. Open your cage a little bit. Get a little vulnerable. Other people need to see people vulnerable. You don't see people vulnerable. You just don't believe that. You're stuck believing that 2 + 2 is 5. If you know 2 + 2 is 4, don't let people go out knowing like that, thinking that it is 5. Let them know what it is. And it's hard for me to read that closing given the forced vulnerability of the pandemic. I have thought about the need for this session again and again, and I'm sure we'll make some great music when we return. But in conclusion, this idea of openness, this idea of playing what's in the room, there are no music stands, there's just the skeletons and the instruments, the biological culture and the material culture. Yes, we all have our histories we bring to the table or to the room, what we know and love and want to share and are ready to share, and we could talk about that. But I think buying into this process of playing together well has helped my students become more themselves. And I can't wait to do it again. So I look forward to your thoughts from my students' voices, and I'm happy to answer questions. Thank you for your time.